All right, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. We're going to get stuck in on the 6 original cast Star Trek movies. So that's what we're going to be doing for this series here. So with this episode, we'll be looking at Star Trek: The Motion Picture and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Kahn. So interesting things we start this conversation here. And again, I don't know how much we can call it a conversation of just me talking, but the idea, right, of that. This week, or I don't know, June 3rd, I think it was, June 3rd or June 6th, marks the 55th anniversary of the last episode of Star Trek airing of the original series. June 3rd, 69. So to give a little backstory there, you know, they knew that the show was done. They were going to air that episode. I think they were going to air it in March, I believe. It was supposed to air, late March. And then Eisenhower passed away. And so they delayed airing the episode because he passed away, but they delayed until June. So I'm not sure what caused that. It's funny, you know, you think about now, in America, I think our next president to probably pass, probably Jimmy Carter. I think he's in hospice care. I can imagine them like suspending TV programming, right, to cover his passing, because we have so many cable channels now that cover the news that they would, that would be the focus of it. Also, of course, any shows that were preempted were just, be on streaming the next day, right, or on demand or something like that. So the show would just air anyway. So interesting, right, that instead it's like roughly like a little over 2 months that they had to wait for that episode. But the episode's kind of a weird one, right? It's one that we it's the gender switching one, kind of a Freaky Friday deal where one of Kirk's former ex-lovers switches bodies with him. And it, for Star Trek, which was an extremely progressive TV show at the time, right? We think of Uhura, Whoopi Goldberg famously states, right, that she was watching the show and ran in to tell her mom, like, hey, there's a black woman on TV and she's not the maid, right? Huge role right there that Uhura had in cinema at that, or it's not in cinema, in TV at that time. Of course, her and Kirk also kissed on screen, which was a big deal. Also, you had that episode, right, the Frank Gorshin episode where you had the alien race where some people had black on one side of their face and white on the others, and some had the other, right? And it was supposed to kind of show how silly, racism was in America at that time, done metaphorically. So a lot of times they're very progressive. That's one of the things, right? It's always the thing that you always kind of laugh about when you see conservatives freaking out about Star Trek being, quote, too woke, close quotes. Like, no, Star Trek, that's what Star Trek is, right? Anyway, but this was an interesting one because it was like the jilted lover kind of thing, where it was like completely told from the side of like, oh, Kirk's completely nice, and no, this woman has something wrong with her if she's doing this, right? There's no real sympathy for her character at all, which, I don't know if they would do an episode like that nowadays, right? Of course, but that's what they did then. But what's interesting, right, is that it was kind of a bit of a I don't know what to say. It kind of was a low moment to end the show on, a bit of an afterthought, right? That a show that was on for 3 seasons like that it sort of gets its finale that way, right? It's not much of a finale for a show. And of course, nowadays, right, we think of TV shows, right? It's not just about creating shows and having a good pilot and keeping the series going, right? But then it's the way you end shows, right? Of course, think of Sopranos is the most famous one, right? When they just kind of ended it, right? And the cable companies got all these calls because people thought the cable cut out because they thought that was what the end of the show, that something had happened at the actual end of the show. So, endings were a bigger deal now. They're a bigger deal now than they were back then. So, again, the episode was kind of an afterthought. But this article I was reading mentioned 2 interesting pieces about that episode that sort of led to what we think of as the Star Trek fandom. One of those things was that there was a major, large or great fan of the show. Her name was Joan Winston, I believe. Joan Winston. Let me check my notes here and make sure I've got the name correct. I don't want to misattribute her name here. Yes, Joan Winston. So she was a huge fan of the show, and she was on set on for the making of this episode. And she actually got to know people on the set. Like, apparently she was like driving, or she was in the car with DeForest Kelley. So she met people on the set. She got to see what was happening for this episode, make notes about it. And so when the convention started, right, in the early 70s, she was able to use these connections to bring stars. So, like, for example, DeForest Kelley, right, he could appear at a Star Trek convention. And these conventions, right, because we, at that time, right, again, we think of the whole convention thing as being this massive sort of entity that it is now, right? This massive business. I mean, here in Philadelphia, the Trader Joe's that I go to is right across the street from the convention center. So it's not uncommon for me to be, going to do my Saturday morning grocery shopping amongst, people dressed like Jedi or, comic book fandoms or anime or cosplay or any of those kinds of things, right? Like they're at a convention, they come over and grab some stuff at Trader Joe's, and, it's usually, you got to dodge the lightsabers and the scepters and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what we think of that thing now. But in this article, they talk about how, the first San Diego Comic-Con only had like 300 people, but by 72, Winston is, with her conventions, she's getting 3,000, and then by 74, 15,000, people at the convention. But again, she was able to get names from the show. So it's like, imagine, right, if you're doing if you think about it, if you're doing a comic convention at that time and you can only get, who? I guess if you could get Adam West, right, that would be a huge deal, but maybe you can't get Adam West, and maybe the best you can do is maybe Stan Lee. And how many people know Stan Lee, right? The comic book industry itself wasn't as big at that time. But for Trek fans, right, if you could say, hey, DeForest Kelley's going to show up here, right, we've got Bones, people are going to come from all over the place to go to it. And so that's what happens, right? So this thing builds, right? And it's interesting because, we look at Star Trek now, we think of fandoms, the big, you notice when I was mentioning fandoms, right, I didn't mention people dressed like Star Trek characters, right? I didn't mention people dressed like Klingons or Vulcans or whatever, right? Like, we don't even think necessarily of Star Trek. We think of it as not like kind of one of the massive fandoms, right? Like, if there's a new Star Trek series out, it's not like right now The Acolyte is getting a lot of pub, right? People are talking about The Acolyte, or when Echo came out earlier this year. Not to the same degree that, like, remember WandaVision was like this huge event, right? Or The Mandalorian, again, it was a huge event that everybody wanted to watch these things. And you think of the Marvel movies themselves, right? Becoming these huge kinds of events. And we don't really see that with Star Trek, right? Like when Picard came out, amongst Star Trek fans, it was a big deal. And I know CBS, Paramount were really trying to push it, but it wasn't that kind of like trending topic on Twitter kind of thing that The Mandalorian is, or WandaVision, right, or Loki, that kind of thing. So, Trek has almost kind of receded a little bit, even though, when you look at the history of it, it was one of the ones that created the fandom as we know it. So I think that's a big piece of it. And it's interesting as we talk about the first movie, how much kind of Star Trek and Star Wars are kind of intertwined, right? And sort of how their fates sort of came together there. But what happens is after this last episode airs, you get the convention circuit that's starting to build up. Also, the show itself was doing well in syndication, which is interesting, right? Because you think of syndication, I don't know if it goes quite to the same degree it was like when I was growing up, sort of in the late 70s into the 80s, where it was like you needed to make a certain amount of episodes to be, to get to syndication, right? Because you'd want to air the show every day, after school or something like that. I think of Star Trek: The Next Generation, right, was as one like that, right? That like first it was syndicated new, right? It was, when you'd watch it on like a Saturday or something like that, it would be syndicated to local channels. But then it got into rerun syndication on its own. And I remember my friend in college had taped like every episode of Next Generation off of the Portland Fox affiliate, Fox 51. So sometimes you get all the commercials, right? But then you'd also sometimes get the Simpsons episode that came in after it, that kind of thing. That was kind of so the fact that this show was in syndication with only 3 seasons and it was doing as well as it was, it gave Paramount this idea that, okay, there's something here, right? We could make some money with this. And I think Roddenberry at that time in the mid 70s was pushing a Star Trek movie. Like they wanted to sort of take the original cast and make a film, and so he'd come up with an idea for that. But then, right, Star Wars is pushed and comes out, right? And I think that one's, that would have been 20th Century Fox would have released that. But it comes out in 77, and Paramount thinks, well, we don't want to have a sci-fi movie come out at the same time as this Star Wars thing, right? We don't want to sort of flood the market with too much sci-fi, right? So they shelve it, but then Star Wars does so well, right? In 77, it's just this massive hit that suddenly Paramount's like, oh, well, where's our Star Wars? Oh, we've got our Star Wars, right? It's Star Trek, so let's adapt this thing. So there's that idea, right, that they were going to maybe make a movie, right? But then there was also this idea that maybe Paramount would make its own broadcast network. So at the time in America, right, we had technically three, you could say four broadcast networks. And for Americans, of course, when I use these terms, right, they all make complete sense. But I think for the rest of the world, it's a little different in how we do television versus other parts of the world. But the way it works in America is we had three major broadcast channels. There were ABC, CBS, and NBC. And those three channels, they would do like programming, like, for example, during the evenings, that would be like nationally televised program, like the Ed Sullivan Show, or Batman, right, the old Batman, things like that. But during the day, those channels would be responsible for their own programming. They might also have like soap operas, like the broadcast networks would have their own soap operas that would air during the day. But other parts of the time they would be responsible for airing things, and then you'd have more local programming and stuff like that at that time. So, like, for example, in the Boston area, there was a Bozo the Clown show, right? There's kind of this local area show where I think my mom was in the audience for it once or something like that. So you had these three major networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC, and Paramount was thinking they would create their own network here in sort of the late 70s, early 80s that would sort of I guess carve their way into that territory. And there would have been independent channels that could have been bought up as affiliates to be part of this Paramount network that they were trying to create. And the idea would be that let's reboot, or not reboot, but let's do a continuation of Star Trek as the series that we sort of pin on that, or as sort of the anchor for that. They end up actually using the same strategy in the early 90s when they do create their own network, UPN, United Paramount Network, I believe it's called. And they have Voyager is part of that Paramount network. So they do actually try this. Doesn't fully work out. It works for a little while. Some of the worst programs, I think, TV shows ever were probably on that channel, like Shasta McNasty. I think Nick Freno was on. Then what they ended up doing is there was another network that started at the same time. So actually, wait, no. Paramount was it was UPN, and then this the WB was the Warner Brothers. They created their own channel at the exact same time. The two of them decided to merge when they weren't working together. So now we have the CW. That's where you get like things like Arrowverse and shows like that. But in the early 80s, it was kind of a crazy idea. Eventually, what happens is the idea that Paramount, I think, was using for their own channel in the early 80s. The late 80s, Fox ends up running with that, and that's when Fox is created as a broadcast channel. So 86 was when Fox comes out. So I vaguely remember probably the biggest program or show that they had when they started in 86 was about 88. They would have The Simpsons, and they would really start to challenge the Cosby Show's dominance at that time. And then of course they also had Married with Children. But anyway, back to Trek, right? So. When the idea for the channel was scuttled, and then at the same time you've got the success of Star Wars, it's like, no, let's take this pilot idea we had for a new TV show and turn it into a movie. And so that is where the Star Trek The Motion Picture is born. So now as they're starting to kind of come up with the idea for this Star Trek The Motion Picture, they're working with Roddenberry. He's kind of coming back, and he's got his ideas for how he wants to do it. I think one of the ideas he wanted was that for the crew to find God, which eventually ends up being kind of the storyline for part 5 of the film series. But that idea kind of gets scuttled, and then they're sort of working with these ideas, and they kind of come up with this idea that one of the concepts was that they wanted the movie to be more 2001: A Space Odyssey and less Star Wars, right? So they didn't want ship battles, they didn't want that kind of thing. They wanted something that was kind of more cerebral, right? And to some extent, I think what's interesting when you think about the old series is that it did have its cerebral moments, right? But we also think of the music, right? The dun 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 dun. When the fights would happen and all that stuff, and you'd have maybe some big unwieldy axe that they pulled off of a set of a Roman movie, Roman Colosseum movie or something like that, and it'd be Kirk and some big alien looking guy fighting over the axe, that kind of right, we think of that kind of thing more as much as we think of the morals and the ideas. The show, of course, the original show was meant to be Wagon Train in space, right? That's the idea behind it. And, that was kind of how Wagon Train was too, right? It was that Wagon Train would have I don't know if anybody's ever seen that old Western, but it would, again, the Wagon Train would kind of go from place to place, and it would get into these stories of individuals that were in the area or people who joined the Wagon Train. And on the one hand, right, you'd want to see these stories because it was much more character driven, and there was more humanity to it than other westerns that you'd see at that time. So it was nice to kind of see those stories. But on the other hand, you want to see the characters, duke it out or have a shootout or something like that too. And there was still that element of a western in there as well. I think Star Trek had more of that than Wagon Train did. But that was kind of the idea, was that, being Wagon Train in space, they wanted to have this idea of like, the humanity of learning about other people. I keep saying humanity, even though we're going to be talking about aliens in these movies, or these shows. But that's kind of the idea. So that was the plan going in, was to have it be this more cerebral thing. But they also, I think, as they were kind of getting into this idea of this V'ger, this character, this like alien that's like completely made out of mechanical parts and computer parts, as they were kind of becoming more and more, the idea of that being more and more vast, it was really about the special effects, right? Like the matte paintings and how to show the scope and the massiveness of it. And that I think to some extent that kind of, from talking to the cast and who were involved with it, that almost sort of took over the movie some. I think that was sort of what happens there. So wanted to do a quick synopsis here. One other quick thing to mention about this movie: this came out in 1979, so same year that I was born. And 2019, the same year that I turned 40, this movie turned 40. And here in Philadelphia, one of the movie theaters showed it. And so we got to see my buddy Ian and I went and saw it with his coworker at the time, and his partner, and so I've seen this one in the theater somewhat recently. I watched it again for this, of course, but it was fun watching it in the theater. I think it'd be nice to see all of them in the theater. I think the only other one out of this group, these six that I've seen in the theater, was number 6. My school, I was in 6th grade, I believe, when that one came out. 6th or 7th grade, I can't remember. But anyway, it was like being part of like the honors group or something like that. We got to go. So my buddy Mike Palos and I went. So Mike Palos, he's my huge Star Trek friend, fan friend, who kind of got me into more Trek than I was sort of as more of a casual fan. He got me into it more. So I remember we went, saw it at like the movie theater in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So those are the two that I've seen in the theater. It would be kind of fun to see some of the others in the theater, but if that ever happens. But I did see number 1 in the theater recently. So it was kind of an interesting thing, even just to think about the movie being that old. And one of the things I think that struck me about it, I know I was about to get into a synopsis here, but let me just get into this piece here. One of the things that struck me about it, watching it this time and also that time, is that it really is a product of its time in a way that Star Wars isn't. Especially the outfits the characters are wearing. Now, granted, they kind of do away with these uniforms in the later iterations of the films, but this first one here, I mean, like the stuff that like the kind of the t-shirt jumpsuit kind of combination thing, or whatever it was that Kirk was wearing, where it's such a like unbuttoned at the top. It looked like something that he would have worn on a Love Boat episode, like hanging out on the on the cabin, like not the cabin, but the deck, hanging out on the deck or whatever, It looked like the people who designed Izod Lacoste at that time, right, designed the outfits for everybody. And so, if you think of Shatner hanging out with Dick Gautier in a Love Boat episode when, whoever, shows up, Suzanne Summers or somebody like that, right? Like, it really felt like that, which was, again, I think it's one of the things about Star Wars that makes it so timeless, is that, Lucas kind of came up with these costumes. I mean, they were definitely inspired by things like samurai films, Kurosawa films, those kinds of things. But when you watch them, they don't exactly feel like something, like the hairstyles and stuff as well. They don't exactly feel like, oh, this is absolutely 77, whereas this movie felt like 79, which again, I was a baby then. It's not like I fully knew what was going on around me, but enough to like as an adult and looking back on it, I can, from what I've seen from TV shows and other things from that time, it definitely had that feel to it. So anyway, so the basic story is that there is this thing out there that is sort of like marauding through space, right? It's like this massive, this massive entity, right? And the first thing, it encounters some Klingons and it completely vaporizes them, right? And then it's on a march to Earth, and it comes across a space station, a Federation space station, vaporizes that too. And so Kirk, he ends up getting, so they end up deciding they need Kirk to go out there and handle this. And they give him like, or maybe Kirk tells Starfleet like, hey, I'm the best man to handle this. But whatever it is, the gang gets back together, everybody but Spock, right? They all get back together. The guy who played I can't think of his name, Decker, right? Decker. So it's Captain Decker is the person who's currently the captain of the Enterprise, and then Kirk comes and takes it from him. He's played by Stephen Collins, who speaking of CW, WB, he had this show Seventh Heaven. If you want to look up his bio, some really problematic stuff. Probably worse than that. I mean, his career's pretty much done, I think, because of him with underage individuals. So anyway, but it's interesting because I think that Seventh Heaven show is completely done. I think you can't see it anywhere because of his involvement. It was a show, I think Jessica Biel, the actress, she got her start in the show, but a movie like this, you're going to see him. I don't know if maybe Lucas would Lucas him out and put somebody else in. I don't know, but anyway, he's playing this Captain Decker. For whatever reason, he gets demoted to commander when Kirk comes aboard. Because I don't know if that's how it works. I think once you get your rank, the only time you get demoted is if you do something really bad. And he didn't do anything bad. It was just that Kirk was taking over his ship. I think you could have him be like a rank above him still and still be captain. But anyway, so this guy's not happy about it, right? Because who would be? But anyway, they're going out there. They're going to encounter this thing. The other things, we've got Persis Kambata. She plays Ilia, I think, or Ilia. She's a Deltan. So what we find out from the Deltans is that they are, there's something about them when it comes to sex, that they have like quite a bit of prowess. And so she has told Shatner that she's made a vow of celibacy. But her and Decker may have had some past as well. They might have some history there. She's bald. She's completely bald. So, again, I think of her, I think of Persis Kambata. I mean, one of the movies I think of was, why can't I think of the name of it now? I keep wanting to say Warrior of the Lost World. I keep wanting to call it Death Machine because of MST3K, right? Where it was Mega Weapon. That's what I was thinking of. But Warrior of the Lost World, the Robert Ginty movie with Fred Williamson and Donald Pleasance. That's kind of what I know her from beyond Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Unfortunately, she's not with us. She died of a heart attack when she was in her late 40s. But yeah, so she's playing this character. Apparently, she was very freaked out when she had to shave her head for this character because that character is completely bald. But anyway, as they're going out into space, Spock is doing this Vulcan ritual where it's supposed to remove any feeling and non-logic from his system. And the woman who's doing the ritual is I don't think you're quite there yet. You still got some emotion in you there. That human part of you is not doing you any favors. And so Spock decides, all right, I'm going to join up with the Enterprise. I know Kirk and them are doing whatever. So he joins up, and they go and they approach V'ger. And it's kind of, one thing after another with this thing. It takes Persis Kambata. It turns her into some kind of android thing to brings her back onto the Enterprise and has her observing them. And as they're starting to go, they're not really sure what this V'ger's motives are, what it wants to do. And then spoiler alert, they find out actually that it does have a past here with humans here. And I think the cops are coming for me. I don't know if you can hear the sirens in the background, but anyway, so that's pretty much the movie. But it when they're the sets that they're involved with when it comes to sort of V'ger's this massive thing where they're kind of just entering into this massive, huge entity thing. It was really interesting. One of the things I was looking to see in the trivia is if there's any inspiration for the Borg with this, and I couldn't find anything there. But Spock does say at one point resistance is futile when it comes to this entity, right? So I'm wondering if there's something, because what happens is at one point, as the movie ends, we find out that this thing, it's like this sort of thinking machine, but it's looking for its creator, and it finds out that humans created the original V'ger, which is Voyager, the probe. And it wants to join with its creator, so they just grab Decker because why not? We're not going to use Decker. Maybe they had some foresight. Well, actually, no. I was going to say maybe they had some foresight that maybe they knew that Stephen Collins was going to have a lot of problematic issues, and they wanted to get him out of the series. But actually, no. They were planning on using because this movie is supposed to be a bit of a backdoor pilot for a TV series that was going to have Persis Kambata and Stephen Collins' characters in it. That had they been able to work out that Paramount TV show. But anyway, he merges with V'ger or Voyager, and everybody lives happily ever after, and that's the movie. I think the complaints about the movie are warranted. I think the biggest one is that we kind of just, the characters are just there, and I think that's one of the issues is it's sort of like bringing everybody back and saying like, hey, everybody's here, but they don't get to really be their characters. I think when we get to the next movie, when we get to number 2, they it's kind of full on, Kirk and Spock and Bones and Scotty and the whole group there, but this, it's kind of more about the big sweeping special effects sequences. It's more about sort of the idea behind this entity and its thinking and its relevance to humans, right? Because this entity is trying to find out, why am I here? Why was I created? Why was what is my purpose, right? What is this all there is for me? Because it's sort of the Voyager probes, right? They're out there collecting information, and it's collected all this information. So now what's next? And I think as humans, right, we always kind of think that, like, what's next? Is this all there is for me? What is there? And so there's a lot of metaphors and things like that in there. But you get the amount of Spock and Kirk and Bones and all that. You get like these little sort of vignettes. That's what I would say. Not vignettes. Vignettes of like, oh, here's Bones being kind of funny in a Bones kind of way, or here's Scotty with a little Scotty kind of quote kind of thing. You get those kind of fun moments, but you don't really get much of them as the Star Trek characters, the characters that they developed over 3 years of doing the show, and I think also the characters that they grew to love when they were going to these conventions and meeting with fans and talking with them. So you kind of lose that element there. There are some elements, though, about this that I think are important. I think the first thing is that this was the first movie that was based off a TV show like this. I mean, you had them. I mean, what was it? Was it McHale's Navy goes to the Air Force? I think was right. Like, so you had some like that before, but not to this scale where it was sort of like, okay, let's sort of continue a TV series, as a movie like this. I don't know if this movie could have used Gavin McLeod like McHale's Navy goes to the Air Force had, but anyway. But this, it's kind of one of the first of those to really do that kind of thing. And of course, as we get into the 80s, you start to see some adaptations. I mean, I think there's a Casablanca TV show. I don't know if you've ever seen anything about that. I think it's not long after this that they do it. It's got like Hector Elizondo as the Claude Rains character, right, coming in to round up the usual suspects. It's very fast. I mean, I don't know if it lasted more than a season. Actually, I'm going the other way around. That was a TV show based off of a movie, right? I'm going the other way around. I'm thinking of movies based off TV shows. Sorry. So, but thinking of like the movies, right? I mean, Dragnet, right? We get the Dragnet TV, the movie with Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd. That was almost more of a spoof. But then, right, I think as the 90s go on, you really start to get a lot of movies based off TV shows, right? You get like the Dennis the Menace, you get the Brady Bunch movie. I'm trying to think of some of the, there's tons. There's some of them I'm probably not thinking of that had sequels. Like the Addams Family, right? That one had sequels. That was a really successful one. This was kind of a first attempt at that, or really one of the first kind of major attempts at it. But I think it also, from a franchise building standpoint, right, this is kind of the first time that you're sort of saying like, okay, you've got Star Wars, right, which hadn't had its second movie come out yet. You've got Superman that they just come out, and so now Star Trek, they're Paramount's kind of entering into this, in a way, but using a property that it had three seasons of a TV show, but just due to the success, they thought, okay, let's try a movie with it, and it's there. So I think that's another important feature of this that I don't know how to say it. Like, so it's a kind of a step in getting us to where we are today, and I think it's something that shouldn't be ignored on that score. And it's hard to say, like, when talking about the difference between this and Star Wars, the fact that it does like so much of it just feels like, and I was reading on the trivia, people were saying things similar about it. Like, for example, the sets, like some of the sets just look like, it looks like a Hilton in the late 70s, right? Or something off of a Love Boat set or something like that. The futuristic outfits were very, very 70s, right? They just feel very late 70s, and it's something again that Star Wars, with the outfits and the way that they covered those kinds of things, didn't really look like that. You don't see like even like Shatner's hair. It feels more 70s. Whereas I don't know if you'd say like, oh yeah, Leia's hair looks more 70s, or that Han Solo or Harrison Ford's hair looks more 70s. But I think the other thing too, though, is that this movie was enough of a success that it told Paramount that we can keep doing these, right? it told them that we have something here, that the show itself for the 3 seasons was what it was, but that we've developed something in the intervening years between the conventions and the success on rerun syndication that making this movie, it was successful enough that, yes, it had its issues. Some of the other things I read about with the issues, Gene Roddenberry really wanted to be involved with edit, that like he was constantly forcing rewrites. So that was, there was a lot of turmoil based off of that. The cast had issues with things. I think like Shatner would request rewrites, or Leonard Nimoy. The other thing with Nimoy, right, was that Nimoy was in dispute with Paramount over they were using his likeness for advertising, and so he was suing them for money that they owed. So he didn't even want to do this movie. But then when they were looking at making it, they were like, well, we can't make this movie without Spock, right? So they had initially created a character, a Vulcan character, who was supposed to replace Spock, and then they ended up just having to write him out when they finally do get Nimoy involved. But he initially didn't want to do this, and I think he was also a little bit, I think there was a part of him that didn't want to keep doing Spock. But I think the other thing, too, though, is that Spock character is just so beloved. I know my wife, she grew up, her parents were both Star Trek fans. Her mother actually had a shirt that my wife now has from one of the early conventions in the 70s. She still has it. So yeah, so she grew up with this, with them being Trek fans. And I think she said she had a poster of Spock on her wall, and her dad would say, oh yeah, when she was really young, of course, that oh, you're going to bed, Spock will keep an eye on you. And I remember there was an article, there was a magazine where a girl who was of mixed race, right? She had one African-American parent, one white parent. She was talking about being picked on in school for that. And he did this whole big, long thing in the character of Spock, saying what it was like as, being part Vulcan, part human in all of the stuff that he dealt with. And it was a really nice kind of thing that he said there. So I think he knew that the character was beloved. And that even if he wasn't as up for playing it because of issues with Paramount, or even just, fatigued with the character, I think he also appreciated how much that character made people happy. And so, once they were able to kind of work out the financials, they got him back on board. But yeah, so it was like this combination of a lot of strife, a lot of turmoil that was affecting the production. And, the fact that the story itself, it could have been better. The other thing I was reading is that they didn't even have an end when they started shooting, right? They were kind of working their way to that end, and they had a lot of different ideas for how they wanted to end it. So they just kind of went in just going for it. I think it was one of those things where they needed they had in their mind, like, okay, Star Wars was this huge success, right? And that comes out in 77. Now we're already into 78, and it's like, okay, now we've got to get our own version out. And they wanted it out by Christmas of 79, and it was like, okay, so they had to rush the production, they had to rush the score, which the score was really fantastic. I think it was nominated for an Oscar. It was nominated for an Oscar, and of course the theme song that would eventually be used for Star Trek: The Next Generation is in this movie as well. But they rushed that piece of it. Then the post-production work, I think, took more than, maybe, I don't know if it's a double the amount of time. It's definitely more time than the shooting itself. The post-production work with the special effects and everything took a long time as well to render all of that. And so they kind of just got the thing out there. I mean, I think they didn't get a chance to screen it for test audiences. The director, he just brought the when they went to when it was premiering, he just brought what was that cut that they had of it. So it had all of those kind of things against it. The director's name was Robert Wise, so just double checking on that. So it had a lot working against it, but still, I think just from the power of people, at that time would have just wanted. I just trying to think of it myself. I mean, I think the best comp that I could come up for in my head in imagining this would have been the Phantom Menace. That's probably the best that I could think of, because for fans of Star Trek, right, you've gone 10 years without anything new from them, right? I think it was a cartoon, but from an adult live action standpoint, right, you're just sort of living off of the conventions and watching the episodes on syndication, but you haven't had anything new. And I think Star Wars is probably a similar comp, that, right, like you hadn't had a movie since '83, right? And so now it's been 16 years, and you've been waiting, and you've been kind of living off of books and appearances and those kinds of things, but you were waiting for the next thing, and then Phantom Menace comes out, and I don't know if people were if Trek fans were as disappointed in this movie as we were with the Phantom Menace. And even when being disappointed in the Phantom Menace, I remember seeing things about that where there were people that almost kind of forced themselves to like the Phantom Menace. Like they were just like, well, it's Lucas's vision, and that he deserves to have his vision, and I'm gonna like that or whatever, because I think there was almost a sense of like, oh, I waited 16 years for this, like this is what I got here. And what's interesting too is that because Star Trek was in rerun syndication at the time, you could have been watching it, right? You could have been watching episodes leading up to seeing the movie, kind of the same way that, like, remember that they released the first 3 Star Wars movies in the theater before they put Phantom Menace out, so we were able to go to the theater and watch those first 3 again. They were those Lucas cuts, right? So you get like that kind of weird small green Jabba the Hutt in the first one in Star Wars, or I guess A New Hope, if we're calling it that, right? You get that kind of stuff that was kind of awkward and kind of weird that they were throwing that stuff in there, but it was still Star Wars in the theater, right? But I wonder if there was a similar vibe. I mean, again, it wasn't as long of a wait, right? Because it was like only 10 years as opposed to 16 years. But I do wonder if fans had a similar vibe of like, oh, this was not the movie I was waiting for. This is, I waited 10 years and this is what I got here. I would have liked something else. But the fact is that everybody went out to see it, right? Everybody that was a fan went out to see it. And I think, when you look at the kind of the receptions of the Star Trek movies, this movie, at the time, it was considered the most expensive movie ever made. So it was at a budget of $45 million. I guess the thing with that is that so Star Trek the motion picture was $45 million, which was the highest at that time. But Superman 1 and 2 were apparently filmed at the same time and together cost $100 million. So I think if the way they split it was that, that you would say that maybe Superman 2 was $55 million. I don't know. There's some kind of hokey thing with that, so that maybe Star Trek the Motion Picture wasn't the most expensive movie of all time. But anyway, at that time it was. And it still turns in $139 million worldwide. It's interesting. When you look on Wikipedia, they adjust the U.S. and Canada gross for inflation, but they don't adjust anything else, right? So it's weird. It's like, oh, well, the budget was $45 million, but it made $346 million. Well, no, it made $82 million in America, and so and then the 86 or 56 or whatever it made outside of that. And so, but still, for that time, it made enough that I think Paramount thought, okay, we've got something here, and I think that's an important thing, that this was successful enough, right? That it got us there enough that we could have what would be the best movie of the series, which is coming up here, is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Kahn. And I looked for comparison's sake. It was interesting. I was trying to get a good sense of like how much Star Wars grossed, just to kind of see where this Star Trek the Motion Picture kind of lands. How close or how far from it. And the interesting thing is, because you have those re-releases, right, we were just talking about, it's hard to get a full number, but I think it was 307 was the initial, 307 million was the initial gross, which, I mean, was huge for that time. It was like a massive phenomenon there. And, obviously the first Star Wars movie, or Star Trek movie, sorry, I keep saying Star Wars, Star Trek movie, it did like not quite half of that, right? Did 139 million. So it wasn't quite that big of a deal, but I mean, it was a big enough a deal, right? That I think Paramount thought they had something here, and we were able to kind of get the ball rolling. So I mean, here we are, we're wrapping this segment up here, but yeah, we're in 1979, and we suddenly got this Star Trek thing back on the rails here, and we look like we're moving in a positive direction here. For people that were fans, waiting 10 years, they get this one. I think for me as someone watching these movies, again, it was great to have that experience to see this one in the theater, 40 years later, and for the 40th anniversary of it. I thought that was a fun thing to do. But I think generally, right, whenever we marathon these movies, or we try to do something like this, it's almost like you want to get the first one out of the way. And what I think was good about this was being able to kind of give some backstory. So, because the movie itself is kind of a get it out of the way kind of deal, but there's so much kind of before it that I think is worth kind of putting the whole thing in context, that kind of makes the conversation a little bit better there. But what we'll do is, why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, we will look at 1982's The Wrath of Kahn. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now.
It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and we're going to start looking at 1982's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Kahn, which I think this one probably for most fans, it's their favorite, right? I think this one's always been my favorite. I think most people I talk to, it's their favorite. I think for people who aren't bigger Trekkies, that kind of are more just sort of casual fans of Star Trek, this is their favorite as well. It just does so much that it's so much fun with it. So yeah, so we'll start chatting about that here. So sort of going back to '79, right, and the success that the first Star Trek film had, despite the setbacks and the drawbacks, right? When it was looking like, okay, we're going to make another movie here. It looks like the success is there, or it was successful enough, right, that there's interest enough there to make another movie. There's a sense of like, okay, what are we going to do for this second film? The first thing was we're getting Gene Roddenberry out. So he was sort of made like producer, and they kind of shipped him away. They didn't want him involved, which is kind of too bad, right? I guess I don't know, it's kind of too bad, but also it sounds like he was just very difficult to deal with in the first film. So that was the first part of it. But then there was an idea of something that hadn't been done in movies before, making a sequel to an episode. And so they went back through the previous episodes of the show, kind of the writers. And as they were going through the different episodes, they found Space Seed, right? The one with Ricardo Montalban as the Khan character. And I think they felt this could be a really good one here that we could base a movie around, right? Sort of pick up, 15 years after this episode happens and tell a story from there. So of course, first they had to talk to Ricardo Montalban and see if he could actually do the movie. And despite some issues with filming Fantasy Island, that was his show at that time, Fantasy Island. Despite some issues with that, he was able to. He was interested. I think he was intrigued with the idea of it, and so he's on board. The other thing is they had to get Nimoy on board again because he kind of wasn't happy how the last movie went. He was kind of done with playing Spock, so one of the interesting things what I read here, this is a bit of a spoiler alert if you haven't seen this movie, but I believe that part of what convinced him to do the film was knowing that his character was going to get killed off at the end. They were killing off Spock. And then apparently, like when he was at the premiere, he didn't know, and we'll get into the story in a little bit here, but that his coffin, that Spock's coffin is sitting there on the planet that was used for the Genesis experiment. And he was like, oh, I'm going to get a call from Paramount, I think. And they brought it, of course, they were bringing him back. But that was the deal, I think, was that part of how they got him on board. Because, again, they can't make a Star Trek movie without Spock, right? You can't do it. So that was part of the deal there. It was that. But this idea of like, okay, let's look through some old Trek episodes and come up with a character or look at one of the characters that was really, really could work for this kind of thing. Of course, Ricardo Montalban, I mean, that Khan character is a really, I mean, that's probably one of, I don't know if that is one of the best episodes. It's one of the more better known ones, right? And it's interesting because I say it's one of the more better known ones, but I'm someone who's coming from a period of time after Wrath of Kahn. So I've grown up with the idea of Wrath of Kahn almost like making that episode more important, right? But whether it's one of the more important ones, I wouldn't know, right? Like for people that were consuming the show in the 70s, would they have said the same thing, that was one of their more important ones, or if there's other ones that they look at? I mean, of course, we always know, like Trouble with Tribbles, right? It's a really, really popular one. When you watch the Marvels, right? They kind of pay homage to that episode. And of course, I was talking about the one, right, with the Frank Gorshin, right, with the people that have the black on one side and white on the other, right? That's a very famous episode as well. But I think of all the ones, that Khan character is just such an interesting one, and so to use him in this context was really good. Of course, the movie's streamlined, right? It's a thinner, quicker runtime. I don't know if thinner is the right expression or the right term I want for that, but it's a definitely not. I mean, the first movie was like, I think 215, and this is like 145 or 153. It says here. I thought it was 145 when I watched it on HBO Max, but who knows? Maybe it was edited, right? Maybe there was some sequences, some Ricardo Montalban sequences that were not good. Though HBO, right? HBO is supposed to be the most transgressive, right? You got to get as transgressive as possible with that. So, but anyway, but it's not as long. I think I want to say that one was the first movie being over 2 hours. I want to say that there wasn't one until we got into maybe those reboot movies in the 2009 into the 2010s. I think it might be until those that we don't get another one that's over 2 hours. So I think the rest of these ones aren't 2 hours, which again, we think of these blockbusters always, movies nowadays just keep getting bigger and bigger and longer. And there's a sense that like you have to keep making them bigger. And it's an interesting idea, right? That your first movie is so big and you say, okay, no, we're gonna trim 20 minutes or half hour off of this one when we make this one and kind of streamline it, and which I think it worked in its favor, right? For sure. So why don't we get in on the plot here a little bit? Because if you haven't seen Star Trek II, The Wrath of Kahn, you definitely should check it out. But the plot is that sometime, I guess, a few years after the last movie came out, Kirk has been promoted to admiral. He is helping train cadets at Starfleet in San Francisco. One of those cadets, right, is Kirstie Alley, right, as the character of Savek. But we've got, Spock is there as the captain of the ship, of the training ship. You've got Uhura is there, Sulu, etc. And then what happens is that while they're out on a training mission, and Shatner's only there on this training mission to like help observe, right? That's really all he's doing there. While they're out, there's a space station out, the Regulus 1, I think, or something like that. But anyway, this space station, it's made by this woman from his past, Carol, who we probably can guess that that Carol has had her and Shatner have had a child together. So the actress' name is Bibi Besh. She's playing the character of Carol, but her and Shatner in the past, they had David, who's played by Merritt Bucktrick, who's an adult now. But they're working on this big scientific experiment thing, and while they're out there, they start to notice that there's some issues happening, and realize, we're the closest ship in the quadrant to help them. So now suddenly Shatner's got to take over the ship, and he's only got these cadets with his old crew to take them out. What they don't know, right, is at the same time, Chekhov is as a commander on a ship with Captain Paul Winfield, right? So if you think of Paul Winfield, great actor there. It was great to see him in this. But they're running a ship called the Reliant, and they're looking for places for Carol's experiment. Carol's experiment is called the Genesis Project, and the idea is that it can take a barren planet and turn it into a planet with life on it. They kind of put this bomb on it, and that's what happens. So they think they found a planet, right? So they go down to the planet thinking that they found the right one, but there's a little bit of life. There's some kind of signal coming off this showing that there's life in one area. As they're going and exploring this life, they realize like, oh, this is the Botany Bay, right? This is Khan, and Khan, of course, and his gang. They take them prisoner, and they put these bugs in their ears. And the bugs in their ears makes them susceptible to suggestion. So Khan can make them do whatever he wants. What he's done is he's made them so he takes over their ship and pretends to be a Starfleet ship. And then the idea is they're going to go get this Genesis thing. So essentially, on this space station, Kirk and his crew are on a collision course to wackiness with Khan and his group. And we get some touching scenes where Kirk reconnects with Carol, finds out about his son, but he's got to take out Khan, and Khan has made it clear that he wants to take out Kirk. And so one of the things, he disables the ship because they think the Reliant is a peaceful ship that Chekhov's on it, can't be bad. Turns out they get sort of sneak attacked, and people get killed, and the ship is damaged. But at the same time, Kirk has been able to get him back and damage his ship, so we got two damaged ships out there. They're kind of playing this cat and mouse game, and hopefully he can take him down. And then at the end, as when Khan feels like he's been defeated and all hope is lost, he sets off the Genesis bomb. And the problem is we need to get out. The ship, the Enterprise needs to get away from it, or everybody's going to die. And the only way for everybody to get away from it is if Spock goes into this radiation area and sacrifices himself to fix the whatever thing that helps power the ship. I guess as a Vulcan, he can handle the radiation a little bit better, but it's still going to kill him, and it does. He dies. They shoot his coffin onto the planet where the Genesis project was, thinking it would be kind of a fitting thing, and then we're kind of left thinking like, I wonder what's going to happen in the next movie. And so that's pretty much it. One of the things I was reading is they actually planned out the second, third, and fourth movie. Like they were planning to have it be a 3-movie arc, I think, that 2, 3, and 4. I mean, at least 2, 3, and 4 are a 3-movie arc. But I think they kind of were leaving the door open at the end of the 2 and 3 to make another movie. That was sort of the plan. And it's one of those things where Nimoy thought his character was done at the end of the second movie. And then when he sees that coffin on the Genesis planet, his quote was, I'm going to get a call from Paramount. I think it was like during the premiere when he discovered it. And of course, yeah, they did. I mean, he's not in 3. We'll talk about 3, of course, in the next episode. But I don't think he's in it as much, right? Because there's like a young Spock who plays him as he's sort of, being reborn, coming back to life. So yeah, there's that part there. But I mean, the things I think that work about this one better than the first one is that we have like a legitimate villain in Kahn, right? Ricardo Montalban's Kahn, and it's like a really fun kind of baddie. And I think one of the things, of course, right, that we know from the Star Wars trilogy, that opening trilogy, is that Darth Vader as a baddie really makes it work, right? You got to have a really good baddie for these things to go. So yeah, so Ricardo Montalban as Khan, for them to go back through those 3 seasons and key in on his baddie, I thought was a really smart move. It was a really great way to kind of jumpstart this thing. That kind of after that first movie where we get more of this existential baddie, and sort of like. It's sort of like this mindless, I don't know. It didn't quite have the same punch that Ricardo Montalban has here. Just works really well. When we look at the reboot movies, right, they have Benedict Cumberbatch play Khan. And I don't know. I like Benedict Cumberbatch. I like the idea of it and all of that. But there's something about Khan, about Montalban playing Khan, that just, I don't know, for me, just it works. On a different level. So we've come up with this really great adversary for Kirk, and it's really this kind of like this mano a mano kind of thing. Going back to the Western idea, right? Like that, having the sort of the 2 gunslingers, but also thinking of like old naval movies and those kinds of things where you've got like these two adversaries that are kind of moving their ships and their crews and trying to sort of take each other down. One of the things I read was that in filming Fantasy Island, Montalban couldn't do any scenes with Kirk, so that's why he doesn't have any scenes with Kirk in the film, because the shooting schedule wouldn't allow for that. So that's why they're only interacting through viewfinders and audio and stuff like that. But which I think kind of works. I mean, we get some of the best one-liners right in this one, right? So we get, of course, when we think Kirk and the people that his landing crew have been marooned on this planet. Once Montalban's letting them know that he's marooning them there. You get Kirk doing the Khan. I mean, just absolutely just beautiful line there, right? Like that's one of the best ever. There's also when he's kind of going back and forth with Khan initially, right? And Khan is like shot up his ship. He's killed other people. He's like, yeah, you killed this person, you killed that person, but it's like you're like a bad marksman, Khan. You keep missing the target. Another fantastic lines, one that my friends and I would say that one to each other. And then, of course, right, when they're actually, at the end, right, when they're having kind of the final ship battle, Shatner's like, I'm laughing at the superior intellect, which is just another great line there. One of the things I read was that apparently, like, the director had to get Shatner to tone it down because he was kind of overdoing it. And some of the scenes didn't require that. So, like, there's the sequence early on when Kirk and when Kirk first realizes that he's being attacked by Khan, right? So what happens is that the Enterprise comes across the Reliant not knowing that it's being controlled by Khan, so they don't have their shields up. And Khan takes that opportunity to shoot at them and kind of hit them. And then after the ship's been disabled and it's close to being blown up, they know Khan has them. Khan says, "Okay, I want to take your accept your terms of surrender." And one of the things is he wants all the information on the Genesis device. And Kirk's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll give it to you." what they're doing though is that they're planning this thing where they have the ability to remotely take over the Reliant. They know that in a way that Khan wouldn't know. And so essentially they're stalling as they do that. And then what happens is that that Kirk needs to sort of sell it that like, okay, tell them to fire the ship. And but the thing was, I guess, like because he was so overdoing it with all the scenes and like talking about it, that there wasn't a lot of like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge there, like they were supposed to be. Or it was too obvious what was happening. So apparently what the director did was he just had him do the scene over and over again so much that by the time he got tired and bored with it, he gave the effect that they wanted for the scene, to kind of have it be a little bit more under the radar there. So, but yeah, I mean, the Kirk you get here is the Kirk you want, right? This is the Kirk from the old show. People were talking about how in that last episode, right, when he's got the whole thing where like there's a woman in his body and he's in the woman's body, that kind of thing. There's a whole sequence there where he's writhing around that we kind of understand as that's Kirk. This is more of that Kirk, right? The pause acting, that kind of stuff. It's all there. It's kind of more fun. I mean, you could say it's campy, right? But I think if you were a fan of Star Trek, this is the Kirk that you want, that you got here. So definitely. One thing I completely forgot to mention, completely as an aside here, I was talking about the legacy of that final episode. And, I kind of got into talking about the series more after that. But one of the other legacies of that final episode is that it was kind of the creation of /fan fiction, right? So we think of like K&S fan fiction or K/S fan fiction as Kirk and Spock, right? And these fanfic ideas that sort of put the two of them together, as the kids would say, ship them, right? But that episode, because there's some moments where Kirk and Spock have these tender moments where it's a woman that Spock's having the tender moments with, but it's that there's sort of those jokes. And I guess apparently on set, Shatner made a joke about it, saying like, "It's always been you, Spock. I've always loved you," or something like that. And this woman, Joan Weston, who's documenting it all, talked about that. So not only did that episode play a part in sort of developing the fandom, right? Because Joan Weston is able to sort of make these connections that lead to her getting them, booking them for her conventions and making the conventions much bigger. But also, slash fan fiction was born out of that as well. And the fanfic community, I mean, if you watch the Trekkies movie, like that fanfic with Star Trek is huge there. So definitely another piece of that I kind of forgot to mention. But anyway, kind of backtracking here, kind of coming back after that aside. This is the Kirk you want here. You've got a really great adversary in Khan, and so all of that stuff really works well. And I think this was the movie that they needed, right? If they were going to keep this thing going, and I think I talked about it there being a third and fourth movie. Yes, the third and fourth movies play together, right? It's sort of like a 3-movie arc that we get out of these films, and this is the first of that 3-movie arc. But they were just leaving the door open for this for a sequel here. They weren't sure it was necessarily going to happen. This one needed to be a success. It needed to work, and it does, right? It definitely does. If you look at it, has a budget of $12 million, right? So again, we talked about how the first movie broke records for its budget, being being $45 million. This is $12 million, so we've scaled the budget down quite a bit, right? Using more practical effects. There are still some effects that are used in this, but again, it's more practical stuff that's being done there as opposed to huge matte paintings and all that stuff that they had. I mean, they did have some elements where they did use some, and I'll talk about it in a second here. But anyway. So it cost of $12 million, right? But a worldwide gross of almost $100 million. We talk about something like a Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance doing something like that, right? But definitely the kind of thing that tells Paramount like, okay, there's a market for this. We can kind of keep this thing going, and so it definitely helped in that sense that this one did what it needed to do and worked, which I thought was really good. Interesting thing I wanted to mention too about the special effects that were used, for example, for the Genesis effect and sort of terraforming the planet and all of that. So there was an arm of Lucasfilm that was actually used, or LucasArts, I should say, an arm of LucasArts that was used in creating this effect. And so I guess there was a guy involved who had worked with Boeing and discovered that he could use fractals to sort of computer generate like mountains and things like that played a huge role in doing this. And one of the things is that that arm of LucasArts ends up becoming Pixar. So it's interesting because this is kind of one of the earlier iterations of them. It was I guess it was so the guy's name was Lauren Carpenter, was a Boeing engineer who was working with Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic. So I guess it was LucasArts later. Maybe it's Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, and then it becomes LucasArts. I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but yeah, they kind of become Pixar. So that element there. So really interesting, right? That's sort of how they kind of start here. But again, it's one of these elements of where Star Trek and Star Wars overlap. That we always think of them as being these two distinct entities, right? You can't be a fan of both. It's kind of like, right, like we think of Pulp Fiction, right? You're either a Beatles fan or an Elvis fan, right? And it's like, like for me, I always consider myself an Elvis person, but I still like the Beatles, right? So you can still like the Beatles, but you got to be one or the other. I don't know which one I think I would probably choose Star Trek over Star Wars. And I don't know, I think it's more the next generation than this series, but I like Star Wars, right? I really like Star Wars. I mean, I think maybe The Mandalorian, right, might have played a big part in maybe making me kind of waver a little bit on that. I don't know what the equivalent of that would be, right, for Beatles and Elvis, right? If you start digging in on like Revolver or something like that, or the White Album, suddenly realize how much you like it more than you knew. But I think I'm kind of still more of slightly more, I guess, if I had to choose. But I don't know. It's not quite the same as like Elvis and Beatles for me, or some of the other binaries that you get in Pulp Fiction or for those kinds of things. But it is interesting that even with these separate things that there's this overlap. But I think for me with my friends, most of my friends, they're kind of the same as me, where they like one more than the other, but they still like both, right? And so they appreciate both. And so I do have a couple friends that are more Star Wars and others that are more Star Trek. But you could still talk about Star Wars with them or Star Trek with them. They still like both of them. So they're neither, and none of my friends are quite to that level where they dress like Klingons or anything like that. Not that I would have anything against that, but just sort of saying it, or going to like movies and stuff dressed like Jedi or anything like that. They're not quite at that level either. So anyway. But yeah, but that's an interesting quirk there that, so despite this movie not having the same budget or the level of special effects that the first one has, we do get this one little element here where this division of Lucasfilm that goes on to become Pixar is doing some stuff here that was really good. Again, that sort of that Genesis device working on the barren planet. Definitely interesting there. Kirstie Alley, right? I think it's important to mention her in here. Kirstie Alley, she's listed as introducing Kirstie Alley, which I hadn't really considered, right? That like this would be her first kind of major film role. She'd done a couple things before this, but nothing really too crazy. She, I guess, apparently was a fan of Star Trek growing up, and so she, Spock was her favorite character, and so she auditioned for Saavik and kind of enjoyed. Playing that part. Of course, by the time the second movie comes out, I don't know if she'd become too big by the time that's the third movie. I'm not sure exactly what happened there because we end up getting the actress. Oh man, I'm always just drawing blanks. I think the actress' name is Robin Kelly. Let me double check, but I think everybody would know her from. No, it's not Robin Kelly. It's she was in Blood Fist 6. So if you know Blood Fist 6, right, you know who I'm talking about. She's we talked about Blood Fist 6 Ground Zero on here before. So yeah, it's always fun, right, to be real time looking up names. Robin Curtis was her name. Robin Curtis, right? So she ends up playing Saavik in the next film. But fans of the site, right? Fans of the podcast and the site would know Robin Curtis best from Recoil, right? She plays the mobster's wife, and her sons are the ones who are getting picked off by Gary Daniels, and she's getting mad at the mobster for letting her sons get killed by Gary Daniels. And in Blood Fist 6 Ground Zero, right? If you remember, she's the major in the military who recognizes that Wilson is the one that can maybe get them out of stuff. So he's again, it's Die Hard in a missile silo, right? And so she's kind of offline, like communicating with him. And one of the interesting things is the general, who's like above her, Win Irwin, who plays the General Carmichael, or if you remember, he like sends her an inflatable doll, and it's like considered perfectly fine, right? As opposed to the kind of sexual harassment that would get have you lose your job. But they kind of just pass it off as a joke. And of course, the other thing about Blood Fist 6 Ground Zero is we get Steve Garvey, right? So interesting, right? Again, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. It's probably better saved for the episode when we talk about 3 and 4 to get into Robin Curtis more. But anyway. Kirstie Alley is playing this part to begin with here, and it's interesting, right, to think of her as like introducing her, right, because we think of her as this big star, but I never really thought of it before, but I mean she still would have been in her 30s. I mean she was born in 51, so she for this film she would have been in her early 30s. But yeah, I guess Cheers comes out. I'm trying to think when she would have been doing Cheers, when she would have taken over for Shelley Long, because again these were all things that happened before I can really remember. From my mind, right, it was kind of more like a rerun syndication. Like at some point she takes over for her. But yeah, and of course the other thing too, right, is that she kind of finishes off the series. So she's there for kind of the rest of the run of Cheers. I think so. So 87 is when she takes over on Cheers, and so it would have been before we got. It would have been before the number 3 comes out, but I guess I don't know, she must have had other stuff going on at that time. She was starting to get better roles, bigger things. One of the things I also read about her part here is that they didn't want her to be like some kind of like sexualized Vulcan, and so they wanted to kind of do some things where they wanted it to be more of like a very serious, like military personnel person. And one of the things they talked about was, I guess, in the previous, on the series, right, with it being the 60s, those outfits made sense, right, with the short skirts and all of that. And when it got into the 80s, they realized that those things were kind of a bit too much, right? That like if you were, you wouldn't be sexualizing military personnel that way. And so they I think with Kirstie Alley's character, she's kind of one of the first ones where they kind of changed that. I know they also kind of did the same thing with Persis Kambata's character in the first one, only right when she gets captured by V'ger and turned into an android, suddenly she's wearing this dress that's like really, really like has a high skirt on it. So she's still kind of in that mode. So this is kind of a different thing here. And then, of course, with Kirstie Alley's character, she's part Romulan, so I guess that allows her to have more emotion in there as well. But it was kind of a cool character. It was cool to see like a different Vulcan, sort of making their way through Starfleet and all of that. And again, what's interesting about that character is that so she's played by Robin Curtis in the next movie, and then I guess they were going to have Kim Cattrall play the character because they originally wanted Kim Cattrall to play the character in this film. And they were going to bring her back as that character. And she was like, well, I don't want to play a character who's been played by 2 other people, if I'm going to play the character. Or I want to play somebody new. And so they gave her somebody new when she was in Part 6, Undiscovered Country. So, yeah, and so anyways, when she comes back there. Another kind of quirky one that I want to mention for sort of fans of this, of our show here, Brett Baxter Clark plays one of the gang, right? One of Kahn's gang. So I mean, we love Brett Baxter Clark here. I think for and again, I want to double check, but I thought I had read that in here. And unless, you know what? No, actually, yeah. So he's part. Yeah, one of Kahn's crewmen. I was thinking actually, he might have been in the first movie, but no, it was this one here. We know Brett Baxter Clark from. I mean, what? He's in. I think of. Totally drawing a blank here. I don't know how I can draw a blank on Sidara's movies, right? On the first Sidara, Malibu Express. Malibu Express. I don't know where I drew that. Why I'm drawing a blank on Malibu. I think it's an age thing, right? Because I feel like I should be able to pull Brett Baxter Clark. He plays just Brett Clark in that movie, but I should be able to pull him and Malibu Express like that. But I was having some trouble there. But we know him from that movie. I think he does one of the Shoot Fighter sequels. He's in Project Eliminator. Kind of always hanging around in those. And I was reading that a lot of the cast or a lot of the crew that was hanging around with Kahn, they were taken from Chippendales. So they're all Chippendales dancers. So it would make sense with Brett Baxter Clark. That would be the kind of role that he would have done at this time. I mean, again, Malibu Express, I think, is 84? Am I right on that? 85 for Malibu Express. So a few years after the Bachelor Party is 84 for Brett Baxter Clark. So he might have been doing Chippendales. So actually, yeah. So it shows that Double Exposure. He played a Chippendales dancer in Double Exposure. He wasn't credited the same year this comes out. So, yeah, it's always kind of fun when we get actors like that in these movies to be able to like, oh yeah, we know him, we know Brett Baxter Clark, and so yeah. It was kind of it's kind of almost like you have to really be looking for him to see him in this. That's kind of how sometimes how those things work. But I always have a fun time watching those kinds of things. Remember they brought him back for Hard Hunted and Fit to Kill. So I think Sedaris was a fan of his, I guess, and I like having him in stuff. So but yeah, just a kind of a quick thing there on that. Trying to go back to my notes and see if there's anything we missed on this one here. I think the other thing too, just sort of going into this one, talking with my wife about watching it. She saw this in the theater in '82, and I asked her, I was asking her a couple things, like one, when you were 7, we were scared when they put the bugs in Chekhov and Paul Winfield's ear, and she's like, I guess so. I don't really remember. Watching it again, I realized part of the reason why you wouldn't be scared if you were a kid is that they kind of cut away to it. So it's like they put the bugs in, but then they cut away really quickly. So you don't really have a lot of time to be scared, which I thought was a kind of an interesting thing, but a good point there. I also was saying to her, because I watched these movies all at once when I first saw them. So when I first saw Star Trek II, The Wrath of Kahn, I saw 1, 2, and 3, and I think 1, 2, 3, and 4 all together, kind of like a marathon thing as a kid. And so I knew right away that, we're going to bring Spock back, right? That he's going to come back to life. But I was asking her about that. I was like, was that sad for you, as a 7-year-old watching this and, seeing him die? And she was like, I guess I don't really remember that either, right? Because she was remembering other pieces of the movie. And again, what I forgot was how much they really sell the fact that he's not really dead when you get to the end, right? Like you gotta have this sad moment where, you think he's dead, and then you get that coffin there, and you're like, oh, they might bring him back. So, a couple interesting pieces there that for trying to think of it because she's someone that I know who saw this when it came out, saw it at the time, and so for me, of course, I would have seen this much later and didn't catch it then. But the first movie was given a G rating. This is a PG rating, and it's still kind of for a PG rating, I guess you, as a kid you could definitely see it. I don't know if I would say. I don't know if I would have a 7-year-old watch it, but yeah, she watched it. She was fine with it, so I think it's not so bad, right, that a 7-year-old can't watch it for sure. But I think the bug thing would have been the one that freaked me out. You also get some moments where the people are kind of scarred and burned from being killed and stuff like that. There's a sequence where we find the bodies of the science crew on the space station, and Paul Winfield's like, he tortured them trying to find out the information, and he couldn't. I guess if you don't show the torture on screen, it's okay. The concept of torture, I guess, for when you're a 7-year-old or you're a kid, I guess the concept isn't as bad as the actual act. For me, the concept is still pretty rough when I'm a kid and I'm thinking about it, because I think actually maybe this is part of the problem, right? As a kid, I had an overactive imagination, and so for me, the concept would have been worse, right? Because I would have been thinking about how horrible it was. It's kind of like with RoboCop, right? When I think of RoboCop, when they edited that version, when the edited version that we first all saw was scary to me because it just, everything was kind of done off screen. But then when I got to actually see the unedited version, the violence was so cartoonish that it was actually kind of fun and I could handle it. It was something with the Friday the 13th movies. I was always afraid of those. But then when you actually watch them, it's the violence is so cartoonish that it actually kind of, if you're not using your imagination, it's actually not as scary. If they kind of make it as cartoonish and goofy as possible, it's actually kind of more fun that way. So I guess there's two ways to look at it there, but anyway, yeah. So again, talking about my wife seeing this, I think my own experience with this movie, the last time that I had seen it, I was trying to think when the last time I'd seen this one was, because again, the first one I saw in the theater relatively recently, but I was thinking it was the time my friend Petrowski and I were house sitting for our friend Palos when he was out of town, and it was funny because he had the collection. So he had this collection of the first 5 movies on VHS, and then he got the sixth one. So the collection came out before the sixth movie came out. That his version of it. So like the sixth one was kind of just added. It's kind of, you'd have to kind of lay it next to it. But like the first five was this like really nice thing, like kind of like all of the borders or whatever, so the spines, right? They all kind of connected together, and then you had the sixth one that was just kind of there. But when we were house sitting for him, we had this idea of like, hey, let's see if we can do all six of them in a night. And we got kind of a late start. The other thing is we'd gone hiking earlier that day with our friend Johnny. So we were kind of tired anyway. But we started in, and I think Petrowski was done by movie 4. I got into number 5, and then I conked out at number 5. But I think that was the last time I had seen Wrath of Kahn before I watched it this time. So that would have been, think about how long ago that was. I think it would have been before Petrowski and I were living together in 03. So it would have been like 01, 02, like maybe 02, I think is probably when that would have been. So 22 years since I had last seen the movie. But I think it's one of those ones that I don't think I ever gets old. Like I always like watching it. The other thing that kind of blew my mind about having seen it 22 years ago was how much of it I remembered, right? Like I remembered all of the different story points. And in fact, like at that point when they're marooned, right? In my head, I was like, but I thought they played a trick on Khan. I thought Spock and Kirk knew that, Spock was coming back for him. But as it was playing out, I was like, did I misremember that? Did I get that one wrong? That maybe like Spock can come back to help or whatever? And then, right, Kirk gets on his communication device, whatever, the communicator, I don't know what they called him. But he pops it open, he's like, Spock, it's been 2 hours. Come pick us up, and then that's it. And he gets back, and then everybody's like, what? You do all the time? And it's like that whole thing. And I was like, that's right, I did remember it that way. And of course, the different lines and things like that, I remembered the lines. And, it kind of surprised me because like when I saw the first one, it had been 4 years since I'd seen the first one. And there were still points where I was like, oh, I didn't remember that, or I'd forgotten that's right how they did that or something. And the other thing too, of course, is this is the first one is a director's cut. HBO Max has a director's cut of it, and I'm trying to remember if what I saw that was the 40th anniversary edition was a director's cut as well. I feel like it was, because what happened was that they had the director's cut they made in like the early 2000s. I think it was like 01, and so the director, Robert Wise, had added some scenes and played with some things there. And then when they were releasing it in 4K in the 2020, I think in 2020, they had to re-render the special effects that he had added to that movie. So I don't know if the one that I saw in 2019 was that version or if it was the original version, and maybe that's why I misremembered certain parts of it. So it's kind of one of those things that it's like Star Wars, where it's always hard to find the original versions of the movies. So it's always nice. There's a few movies out there that I like the originals better than the director's cut. I think the best example is Chronicles of Riddick. The director's cut just butchers all the great one-liners, which is really a shame. So definitely, if you're thinking of Chronicles of Riddick, you want to be able to find the non-director's cut if you can watch that for sure. But anyway, I think it's probably a good time to wrap this up. We're almost 40 minutes into this segment here. So, as we get into the next couple here, so in 2 weeks we'll be looking at 3 and 4, which we'll finish off this sort of mini 3-movie story arc within the 6 films. So it'll be interesting to kind of do that there. It's going to be interesting because part 2 is the best one. It's my favorite one. So there's going to be a little bit of a letdown there. The other thing is it's going to be interesting. Part 3 is trying to remember if I have a kind of a personal connection to that I can also share in here as we talk about this and put it in context and all of that. But anyway, that's what we'll be looking at in 2 weeks. So yeah, as we wrap up here, just some plugs. Of course, the podcast. Earlier this week, right, we had Pistol Whipped with Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time. One thing that I should note about that episode. So I recorded that one on Clean Feed, and I was listening to it through my own kind of channels or whatever. And the original, the first segment sounded okay, so I didn't do anything to it other than edit out a couple of going to break and things like that. But for the most part, I kept it as it was. Whereas the second segment, it sounded like Scott's audio in spots was a lot lower than mine, and I was leveling it out to make it all work. And then when I listened to the whole completed project, when I uploaded it, it was like, oh, the first segment was a lot quieter than the second segment. So something happened there. So just keep in mind that if you're listening to that first segment, you might lose your eardrums a bit when that second segment comes through. But otherwise, that was a really fun conversation on Pistol Whipped is a fun, Seagal actioner there. So definitely a fun one there. And yeah, we'll have to get back in touch with Scott about what the next Seagal movie is going to be. Record with him here in the next month or two for that one. So yeah, keep posted for that. And then of course the blog dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. I think this week we'll be looking at doing UFO. That's Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, so that'll be interesting as well. Then of course my novels, Don's House in the Mountains. You can find that one on Kindle and in paperback. Also Bainbridge, same thing, my short action novel, Kindle and paperback. And then my other novels, Chad and Accounting, Girl and a Gun, and Holtman Arms. You can find those all on Amazon as well. Links to all of that will be here in the podcast description. All right, well, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk soon. All right, bye everyone.
Direct